Welcome to Narrative Responsibility, a podcast about examining the meta story of your life, how well it is serving you, and how to change it for the better. I'm Elena Wolf, relationship coach and life alignment mentor, and this is this week's New Perspective.
Hi there! I'm so glad you're here today. This is episode 38. Movement, not exercise. Or I thought about calling it exercise really sucks. Because it does. I am continuing the series of deep dives into the specific reasons we disconnect from our body, that self that is, from episode 36. Today, I'm going to discuss why exercising, or maybe more specifically over-exercising, causes us to shut out our body signals and then offer a different approach for those of you who might be interested to try it. Now, when I talk about exercise or physical activity in general, I am speaking from the end user perspective. I am not any kind of expert in kinesiology or physiology, so this is just based in my experiences and observations I have made about myself and how I operate, and then also a bit of anecdata from friends who have had similar experiences. For additional context, so that I don't come across as someone who just hates exercise or, really dislikes moving my body or have really never done it, I'm going to tell you a bit of my background. I went to an elementary school where we had gym class every day, junior high as well. So it wasn't until high school that it became somewhat optional. In high school, I chose to play soccer with the school team, and in addition to having those activities at school, I was also a dedicated runner for many years. I'm talking like I ran 15 to 20 miles a week, every week from age 14 to probably 24. And at various times alongside all of that and since, I have dabbled in aerobic dance, high-intensity interval training workouts, body sculpting workouts, and hatha yoga. Even being technically middle-aged, I'm still trying to not admit that, but I am. I am generally energetic and not really as out of shape as I ought to be for what my lifestyle kind of seems like on the surface. I think this is because I do a lot of things like willingly parking further away from the store, so I have to walk, willingly taking stairs and not elevators, definitely carrying everything in from my car in one load because God forbid I ever have to make two. So, get that upper body workout. And I also use walking as a meditation aid. So I tend to walk a lot. And sometimes I will just randomly burst into song and dance or just dance because that's what ex-theater kids do. I love moving my body. I love being strong and flexible and fit for a wide range of activities and just kind of like necessary parts of life. And I hate exercise. In fact, I don't exercise. I won't exercise. So what happened? How did I go from, being this soccer player, dedicated runner to, I don't exercise anymore because I deliberately choose not to? Well, this schism is a result of my emotional associations, not just with the word exercise, but like the whole concept behind it, like the underlying philosophy of it, or at least the kind of concept philosophy as I approached it, which is also how I was taught to approach it. Your mileage may vary. You might have been raised in a different culture or with more enlightened adults around you than I was in my school system. So let's back up a second, and I'm going to ask you, what do you think of when you hear the word exercise? Like, what is the underlying information that word summarizes for you? What is the symbolic meaning of that word for you? Mine is something like me, sweaty, red-faced, panting, with stitches in my sides and a growing nausea in my body. It's physically uncomfortable in the moment and something I know will create extended physical discomfort in the aftermath. I'll need 45 minutes minimum to stop sweating. I'll be tired for several hours afterward. I might have a headache for the rest of the day. And I might be sore the next day or even for the next 2 days. All of this has been undertaken in the hope that it will make me stronger or improve my cardiovascular endurance, maybe even help me lose a little bit of weight or keep from gaining weight. All of that is something that my mind, my self that acts, decided was to be carried out by whatever means necessary, whether I wanted to in that moment or not, and however awful it might feel to do. I mean, no pain, no gain, right? Your internal image of exercise, what it means, what it looks like, how it feels, why you do it, might be somewhat or entirely different. But that's mine. And that is my meaning of exercise because of what I was taught to do, how I was taught to approach moving my body. The institutions in my life of school, gym class, and then playing a sport taught me to listen to the coach and not myself, not my body, not myself that is. The coach was dictating how much we were to move and in what ways. And any student not participating in full would get some kind of punishment, whether that was a lowered grade or extra laps to run, or in the case of an extracurricular sport, dismissal from the team. And speaking of extracurricular stuff, it was a regular practice at my high school for the coach to decide that if the team wasn't focused enough at practice or not trying hard enough, then they got assigned to run extra laps or to engage in the most physically demanding drills in the arsenal that the coach had. And sometimes that meant that we were being punished for being tired with more exercise. It was absolutely a corporal punishment. And that's because any instance of falling off of performance was interpreted as not trying as opposed to not being able to. And saying that out loud from an adult perspective kind of makes me wince at how counterproductive that philosophy of training was. But what I'm getting at is that there was a hierarchy in those relationships. There was authority and obedience. Insufficient obedience to the dictates of the authority was insubordination and fit for punishment. The authority was maintained by fear and the fact that it had power over those below it within that system. The authority could take good things away and or add bad things, and the system backed up the authority's actions. So, of course, we were incentivized heavily from a very young age to ignore the signals from our own bodies and simply do what we were told. There was also an assumption that the coach knew what was best for training us, that the coach had an understanding of our general fitness levels going in and a plan for increasing strength and endurance sustainably. There was an assumption that the regimen was reasonable and appropriate for all of us because, of course, the coach had, studied this stuff, right? They knew what they were doing, right? In the adult world, the fitness industry operates in a similar way. Perhaps it doesn't have quite the same kind of authority to punish us for failing to show up or not try very hard, but there's definitely an assumed authority based on experience, training, and knowledge of theory, as well as a sense of how theory is best applied, at least hypothetically. This is what we assume someone who's a fitness instructor, whether that's, personal trainer, a class teacher, someone who's a fitness coach, something like that. We assume that they have that kind of insider expertise information that we don't have individually. So That sense of putting trust into an external authority to decide for you how you ought to use your body is the same as what we had as children with our elementary PE teacher, coach, and then in, high school with our sports coaches. Thus, the idea of exercise I was given was something like fail forward or fake it till you make it. Basically, it was being given performance standards and forcing my body to meet them or to get as close as it could, regardless of my actual fitness level, and then to repeat forcing myself to that standard until I didn't have to fake that standard. It was actually just where my fitness level was. And this was done regardless of the risk of injury from overuse or overextension, or internal overexertions like heat exhaustion and dehydration, or even just sort of systemic issues like being generally overtired and not giving my body the proper chance to recover and rebuild from these overexertions. So I'm going to give you another moment to get clear on your internalized meaning for the word exercise. Okay, hope you've got it. Now take a moment to picture it again, and then this time I want you to notice how your body feels when you consider this concept of exercise. What did you find? I had an immediate tension in my abdomen, a sort of stomach-dropping dread. Oh no. A bit of a slump in my shoulders, anticipating defeat. A heaviness in my overall body, or maybe it was more just a plunging of my general energy level as a sign of reluctance or resistance. Basically, I have an unambiguously negative reaction in my body to the concept of exercise. That is my self that is saying no in the only way that it can. Feelings, sensations in the body. And this negativity only makes sense if built into my concept of exercise is discomfort, overextension, physical pain, and possibly injury for the sake of a larger goal. How could my self that is, my body self, that cannot disconnect from the discomfort nor forget its memories of it, how could that part of me not feel resistance to the mere thought of exercise? Exercise, as my body understands it, frankly sucks. It feels bad to awful, and the times it has felt awful influence the perceptions of the times it merely felt bad, coding them as more negative by association. And yet, for years and years and years, myself that acts would force myself that is to go exercise anyway, despite my body not wanting to, despite discomfort or even pain on a physical level, despite having low energy for the task and no enthusiasm for it. I was motivated by the promised reward, regardless of whether it ever seemed to manifest, and by a desire to avoid the self-shaming that would come if I did not do it due to the belief structure that I had at that time. Things like, I was lazy if I didn't push past resistance to goals and achieve them anyway. I was weak and undisciplined if I listened to the voice of pain or discomfort and let it rule me. Softness and kindness were for people who weren't strong. And I was strong. And tough, and not lazy, and not so weak-minded that I couldn't impose my will onto my stupid body that didn't know what was good for it. Really toxic stuff when you think about it and say it out loud, but it kind of naturally follows from what I described last week about being given no accommodations for my physical needs or sensitivity, and also from the ways that I was taught to ignore what I might need or want and listen to the voices of external authority. I mean, you have to come up with some kind of narrative that's going to make that a good choice for yourself, and that was mine. But all that so-called discipline did was entrench in my body a deeper and deeper hatred and fear of exercise, and then a stronger resistance to it. Additionally, all those years of forcing my body to do it anyway eroded trust between my two selves. My self that is could not trust my self that acts to listen to it, or to not hurt it, or to not shame or criticize or punish it for what it did not like or could not do. And then in turn, my self that acts could not trust my self that is to understand even what was good for it, healthy for it, necessary for its thriving. Myself that acts could not trust myself that is to support it in acting out what was proper and beneficial for me. Perhaps you experienced a similar phenomenon. Your mind took in information about what is healthy for you or good for your body and tried to act on it, but then your body responded with resistance or rejection. So you ended up in this sort of battle for dominance between the two of them. I certainly had such a battle. Really, it was a war with many smaller battles. And for a good probably 2 decades or more, my self that acts won most of those battles. My self that is ran so many miles, heavy-footed, staggering, huffing and panting, hating the activity, while my self that acts hated the thought of being lazy or sedentary or getting fat or giving up and not trying to be better just a little bit more. But myself that is won its share of battles too, with minor injuries that made me stop exercising and keeping a too full schedule that didn't leave much time for it at certain points of the year, either in the summer when it got too hot too fast or in the winter when it got dark too early. Oops. Myself that acts gave up the fight when exercising stopped getting easier after an initial struggle, like when I had paused. In other words, when I was seeing no real cardiovascular improvement coming out of a period of not exercising. And also when I started gaining fat from exercising. I don't mean weight from muscle development, but literally like adipose tissue. I have since learned that this mechanism has to do with cortisol levels and metabolic disruptions. At the time, it really just took away one of my main reasons for forcing myself to exercise in the first place. And after I stopped forcing myself to exercise as being unhelpful or even counterproductive to my goals, myself that acts finally allowed myself to listen to myself that is. And it heard loud and clear that myself that is hates exercise. It hates working so far above its capacity. It hates getting overheated to the point of nausea. It hates being sore the next day. Those sensations are self-inflicted torture to myself that is, and it did not understand why it was being forced to experience them over and over and over again. That's when I realized that I was done with exercise. Never again would I do that to myself that is. Never again was I going to force my body to endure that kind of discomfort. And I also saw pretty clearly how, rather than narrowing the divide between my conscious mind and my body, all this fighting with my body over exercise had actually widened that gap. Like, exercise is touted as a good body-mind practice, kind of a mindfulness meditation or a way to get out of your head and into your body, out of your head into the present moment. But honestly, for me, it had the opposite effect. Exercise made my body feel bad. It made my body an unendurable place to inhabit. If I had been truly mindful while I was forcing my body to perform things it was not really fit to do, all that would have happened is me experiencing, 10 out of 10 clarity, the discomfort and distress of my body and the sometimes physical pain and the constant emotional pain, that sense of shame from myself that is for not being enough, and the sting of betrayal at having its needs and boundaries and preferences violated. I promised my body that I wouldn't force it anymore. Neither would I dictate to it. Instead, I would listen to it, collaborate with it, let it, myself that is, tell me, myself that acts, what it wants, and then myself that acts can coordinate my life in order to have the space for meeting that want or need in a way that works for all of me. Because there is something to all that mindfulness and mind-body practice talk. It's just that you cannot listen to it through the filter of a hierarchy, where the self that acts has power and authority over the self that is. In that case, all that happens is that the activity or mind-body practice becomes one more imposed regimen, one more item on the to-do list, one more should, one more obligation to perform in order to be enough. To be mindful enough, self-caring enough, committed to your long-term health enough, trying hard enough, like whatever enough, all of the enoughs, right? And that works against the whole point of getting into your body, because the reason you want to get into your body is to drop away from all of those agendas of the self that acts, all of those stories in your mind. It's to be present with yourself that is, and to enjoy the body that you inhabit, to enjoy it as a precious extension of you, as something integral to you, as something wise in its own domains, and a voice that you can trust, therefore a voice you should be listening to. You know, being in your body, present to your body, is supposed to deepen the connection to your body, not lessen it. And when I made my body that promise, it believed me. It gave me feelings of relief, gratitude, a sense that it could finally rest, a sense that it could finally feel safe. Safe from the pain of self-inflicted distress, safe from being asked to endure sensory overwhelm, safe from being emotionally attacked for getting tired and not being perfectly strong or coordinated at everything all the time. Basically safe from having its boundaries violated. But underlying that was a legitimate yearning also to be strong and graceful and to be able to run and jump and hike and dance without real strain or discomfort. It was a desire for the sense of vitality that comes from being free and able to move your body however you might want to, and with whatever kind of actions you might want to take. So my body was craving movement and strength, even as it needed to feel safe from overexertion and this kind of shame-based criticism. And that's actually where I found my solution of looking for movement rather than trying to exercise. Now, movement to me is kind of like the word exercise. It's not just the word, it's the whole philosophy behind it. So it's not just a synonym for physical activity, but rather a different approach to how physical activity is done. And the philosophy of it is something like this. Movement is something my body craves, therefore the act of moving is a response to that desire. And then in practice, the process of movement, not exercise, goes something like this. My self that is expresses a desire to move in a certain way or with a certain intensity. Sometimes it's a felt sense of straining muscles or my feet landing rhythmically on dirt. Sometimes it's an image, like a visual in my mind, of a specific movement or type of movement. For example, a yoga pose or a clip of Shakira's Hips Don't Lie video. Sometimes it's merely a restlessness in my body, an inability to focus, or a distress even at being asked to remain still. That's myself that is expressing this desire. Hey, I need some movement. Or even, hey, I want this specific movement. Myself that acts hears this desire and makes the arrangements to satisfy it, like rearranging my schedule if I have immediate flexibility to do that, or planning a time for the soonest available point that I have flexibility. And then myself that acts is responsible for following through on the plan, getting me out the door into that activity at the right time and with any necessary preparation. For example, being hydrated, having workout clothes on, having the right shoes on, that kind of thing. Myself that acts is also responsible for continuing to tune into the messages from myself that is as I get into motion. It's noticing what feels good. And in this case, I mean good as satisfying the need to move. It doesn't always feel pleasurable, but as long as it's not actively feeling bad, satisfying that desire and not actively feeling bad is good in this context. So it's noticing what feels good and noticing when an activity stops feeling good. Then it's considering why that movement no longer feels good and adjusting what I'm doing. If an adjustment can solve it, great. If stopping solves it, great. I'll offer an example with running, which for probably the first 4 years of this movement, not exercise philosophy, was something I thought I would never do again. I thought my associations with running were too deeply entrenched as negative for me to ever desire to run again. But honestly, this summer, like the last few months, I think it maybe started in April or May, my body has actually been craving running, and I've listened to it. I've started running again. So this is how this works in practice. If the running starts to feel bad, I notice why. If it's because I'm breathing too hard, then I stop running and just walk until I catch my breath. And when the walking feels too slow and not intense enough, then I start running again, back and forth the whole route. Now, if it feels bad in my body because, say, my feet are landing too hard or my knee is getting pressure in a weird way, then I don't necessarily stop running. I focus on my form. I engage my core better and I realign my posture and I start being really careful to pay attention to how I'm placing my feet. And I then notice, do those adjustments put the activity back into the satisfying but not miserable category? Usually they do. If not, then it's like, okay, I need to stop because this is risking injury, and would then like walk the rest of the route. Now, it's possible that for you, this kind of tuning in and listening to the body's signals in the moment seems entirely obvious. But for me, it's like a totally different way of relating to my body while engaging in physical activity than I have done before. Because it's not forcing myself to keep going any which way I could just to make a goal that had been determined in advance by my mind. It's not viewing pain or distress as proof that I'm working hard enough or doing it right. Rather that it's time to pull back and go slower or re-examine the activity that I've chosen. I mean, I'm literally just listening to my body and responding as if those signals are worth listening to. And I'm letting my body's actual level of fitness dictate what I do rather than forcing it to operate beyond its current level. Basically, I'm no longer forcing my body to equate movement with discomfort or overextension. Instead, I'm rehabilitating my felt sense understanding of physical activity. I'm creating a different energetic experience for my body, one where its needs are considered and its sensory input thresholds are honored. And I've discovered that when I don't force myself to exercise, I don't really resist being active. If I let myself stop running when it feels bad, I don't cover less distance. Sometimes I end up covering more because I'm not hating every step and thus willing to do only the bare minimum. I can see the number of steps that I take at a run rather than a walk increasing without any shaming or internal bullying of myself that is. And I'm not disconnecting from my body while I move it. Instead, I'm fully inhabiting it and learning more about it as I tune into my form and balance in the various muscles I'm using. For example, did you know that running really uses your back and your core muscles? Because I sure didn't, even though I ran for at least a decade of my life on not quite a daily, but more than every other daily basis. It's amazing what you don't notice when you are disconnected from your body as opposed to fully in it. What a concept. So, if you are someone who hates exercise, maybe take the time to ask yourself and ask your body why. Like, what are its reasons? What are the specific reasons that you feel that aversion to it? And once you have that answer, maybe consider if there are ways you can change your approach to be more aligned to the needs of both your self that is and your self that acts. You know, what does your body need and what does your mind want to accomplish? Those don't have to be at odds with each other. And if you change the goal from a top-down performance demand, like my concept of exercise is, to something more co-creative, like my concept of movement, does that unlock any energy or motivation for you for physical activity? Try it and let me know how it goes. So that's all for this week. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to know more about my work, you can check out thepatternbreaker.com. You can help the podcast grow by leaving me a rating and review or sending me any thoughts about it, desk@thepatternbreaker.com. You can join my Patreon, patreon.com/narrative responsibility. And until next time, what part of your story are you going to take responsibility for?